Hey guys, what's up? Excoundrel here, and today we're going to be covering a very important concept in Command & Conquer Rivals. We're going to be talking about building your own deck. Now, as Command & Conquer progresses as a game, it's invariably going to release more and more units. That ever-increasing roster of units is going to increase the variety of decks, and therefore, testing your own deck building skills will become more and more important as the game goes on. So, what core concepts do we need to consider when building our own deck? The first of which, and probably the most important, is what is the deck's identity? Now, I will cover this point at the end because we have to go through a couple of others. Second, is it balanced? Does it have answers to the different types of unit that are in decks in Command & Conquer? For instance, I'll take an example. You need an answer to infantry, you need an answer to aircraft, and you're going to need an answer to vehicles. So your deck needs to have some kind of answer to each individual unit type, otherwise your deck is going to have a weakness that can be exploited. Does your deck revolve around a specific unit? And that unit can be something that is strong in the current meta, or a unit that you just like. Some people build Mammoth Tank decks because they love Mammoth Tank, and even though it's not the most viable unit in the world, people make decks that work with it really well. And second, is it feasible? Think about what decks are on the ladder right now and what units are on the ladder. You are almost certainly going to need a deck right now that deals with attack bikes, for instance. So if your deck doesn't really deal with attack bikes very well, it's probably not going to be that feasible in lots of matchups. And finally, like I said, we're going to cover its identity. In my eyes, there are three main identities of decks: aggro, ramp, and mid-range/specialist. Aggro is mainly tier 1, tier 2 units, and its main objective is to control the first missile. If you lose the first missile, your deck win condition kind of goes out the window, and you look to close out the second missile with pure volume of numbers. Ramp and tech decks have very expensive units in their roster, and they often like to go two harvesters to accelerate that late game. You don't need to worry about the first missile as much, you're more concerned about contesting the second and contesting and holding the third. And mid-range are decks that kind of can rely on one harvester but do have some costly units. Also specialist decks like Alicia Destiny's very heavy War Factory decks. Those are decks that often you can build to your own liking. So, I started with a core concept of I wanted the early game of Missile Troopers and Shockwaves, and I wanted that tried and tested combo of Wolverines and Titans for the late game. This was going to be a double harvester deck with a good mid game to try and contest a lot of the popular mid-range on ladder right now. So, instead of going for War Factory, as you might have seen I've admitted that, I went and made an idea of going for an Air Talon. Now, the Talon is really good at contesting Shockwaves and Flame Troopers, and I thought in my head that the Orca would be good at contesting a lot of vehicles on the field in the mid-game, allowing me to ramp up to the Titan. The design was counter Predators, or Scorpions or whatever, with the Orca, and pressure the early game with the Talon, allowing me to feasibly get my double harvester out. I use Colonel Jackson because his commander ability is very flexible. It allows me to trade up at any stage of the game, gives me really powerful point contest, and is in general, in my opinion, one of the most standard useful abilities. Whereas I think things like Ion Cannon have their specialist roles, I do think that Commander Jackson's hero ability can kind of be applied to anything. So that is why I decided to go for this deck. This was the theory that I had in mind. I went through my checklist of all of the things that we talked about before. It's balanced, it has answers to a little bit of everything, so I was pretty happy. The next process in the design phase is, once you're happy with your first draft, is going out there and testing the deck. The only way that you're going to get real-time feedback about how your deck works is by going and playing it. So I had a go on ladder, and this is a sort of Master 2, Master 1 level of GDI, and as you can tell, I wasn't off to a great start. I wasn't having a great time, but I certainly got the Orcas out and things started to look better for me. I was starting to get a bit validated about picking my Orca in the current state of the game. Although this is a very odd deck that I'm playing against, it's not entirely meta in its own right, I was starting to get that positive feedback loop of, hey, I have picked a good unit here and I think it's working really well. That is a fallacy of only playing a few games. I then went on to play more games. So I think I won about 5 in a row with that deck, and I was thinking, yeah, this is awesome. And then I faced up against a pretty popular Nod deck. With a slight variation, this guy had gone for buggies, which you don't often go for, and I started to struggle. And I didn't only struggle in this game that you see on the screen, I played this guy again, following immediately, and I lost for the same reason. I did think that this deck was going to have a slight weakness versus attack buggies, but I thought I was potentially able to deal with that by Missile Troopers. Unfortunately, Attack buggies are both good against Talons and my Orcas, so a single unit was throwing a real spanner in the works for me. And as you can see, even though I was trying to get to the late game, my Harvesters were continuously under pressure. Now, this is not a great double Harvester map, admittedly, but it did highlight some weaknesses in my deck. I then went to play him on a good double Harvester map and lost anyway, so realistically, the deck sucked. Realistically, I came out of this and said, okay, I won 5 in a row, but that was against some weird deck types and actually maybe favored an Orca had some good matchups. So what do I need to change? Because I'm going to be, if I'm going up against aggro a lot of the time, which I will be, especially with Nod aggro attack bikes, I need to have something that's a little bit more flexible in dealing with attack bikes, but maybe giving me some more flexibility in the early game as well. I can clearly see that the Orcas were definitely my weakness. However, I think that the Talons were pretty good. So the Orcas were definitely my weakness, and the Talons actually had some good use in that game. Orcas are kind of garbage, to be honest. I did know that Orcas are kind of garbage before putting it in the deck, but regardless, I thought maybe it would have a good place in the meta right now, especially versus very vehicle-heavy deck lineups. So I decided to change things up. I kept the Talon in because I thought it was good. I kept the Talon in because I thought, yes, okay, I understand what the Talon does, gives me early pressure, and that means that I can help pressure the early game and maybe even contest for that first missile. I then decided to throw Jump Jet Troopers in. Jump Jet Troopers are good against tanks. They're also good against attack bikes. They're really good against attack bikes, and I had level 11 Jump Troopers, which is great, right? So this also meant that I didn't confound my deck with more building structures. Because another thing that you do need to consider is that every building type that you put into your deck is another upfront cost that you're going to have to pay before you can start building units. And I didn't actually want to put in a War Factory, because if I put in a War Factory, that meant I couldn't really use Talon, and I would have way too many upfront costs to get this game going in the early game. So I decided to put the Jump Jet Troopers in, specifically because they were from the barracks, I didn't need to build anything more, and they actually helped plaster over some of the weaknesses that I were having. They're also incredibly quick units, they're good at contesting points, and they let me pressure enemy double harvesters. I can go Harvester Shockwave, scout out for double Harvester, use Shockwave to defend my Jump Jet Troopers or body block for them, and take a Harvester. So this seemed like a no-brainer. I could then get out my own double Harvester once either claiming the Harvester bounty or just buying enough time, and then I could work towards my late game of Titans and Wolverines. As you can see though, this deck will struggle with anti-air. If I get heavy air units thrown at me, I, might struggle with just the combination of the Talon, the Wolverine, and the Missile Troopers to deal with it. Although, to be honest, I'm not any worse off than I was before. And actually, with the Wolverine's buff to air damage, I felt like I was mostly going to be okay. So again, with my second draft, I had to go and test it. Now, for those of you wondering why I picked Jackson, I just think he's really good at trading up, especially in the early game where it really counts, and in the late game gives some of my more powerful units really big power spikes as well. So I want to show you here specifically why Jackson works so well with my choice of Jump Jet Troopers too. I did some scouting with the Shockwave Troopers. I saw that he went for the double Harvester, which meant that he was going to be pretty low on cash, especially low on cash to deal with the Jump Jet Troopers on this specific map. And you can see here I got a massive Tiberium boost, which allowed me to get out my Wolverine, and after the first missile, he could only catch up with a singular Basilisk, and there was not enough pressure on the map to be able to get him back into the game. So I had an accelerated late game deck from just the inclusion of the Jump Jet Troopers. So already pretty validated. I then go up against a mid-range GDI deck. Again, ignore his rifleman, I go straight to the back to scout. I then use my Shockwave Troopers in the defensive position to give space over to my Jump Jet Troopers, who using the Commander Jackson perk, end up getting a kill onto the Harvester. This allows me to flood the map with a couple of Talons, which is great. And even though I lose the first missile, I'm actually in a really good economical position. He has only just got another Harvester back onto the field, and I use those same Jump Jet Troopers to go and pressure it. So he's actually pretty starved of Tiberium right now, and I've already got my Titans and Wolverines on the map, and this now is a massive game for him to have to come back from. He's working at a Tiberium deficit, I've got units that counter him on the field, and even with the Pitbulls there trying to take out my Wolverines, I do have that Titan roaming around. And again, this was just more games of testing. I have probably played about 10 games with this deck, and I haven't lost yet, so I feel like it's actually in a pretty good spot in the current meta. I think actually this is the deck that could really do some work for me, getting me up to Tiberium League on my GDI, which I'm still slowly grinding towards. But that was the process that I went through to create the deck, and I think it's useful kind of knowledge for people to go away and have a look at analyzing their own gameplay, seeing what works and seeing what didn't, and then trying to create your own decks. And even if it's just taking in certain units, the kind of thought process that you go through applies the same here. Hope you enjoyed, guys. If you did, please subscribe and drop a like and a comment on the video, and I will see you soon.